It doesn't matter what year you are. I'm head of the associates. If I give you an assignment, you do it.
Hey, everybody. This is your daily dose of all things royal. Welcome back, my gorgeous, good looking friends. Today, we have quite a bit to talk about. So get yourself a cup of tea and get comfortable because we're going to go through and rip the Archewell Impact Report apart. So, yesterday, Archewell Foundation slash public charity released this report covering years 2020 to 2022. My initial impression, what a joke, is nothing but flowery language as well as a lot of hypocrisy as well as filled with lies. Can't say that I'm surprised, and I'm sure you guys aren't either, because this is standard for these two. Nothing more than a PowerPoint presentation turned into a PDF. And they forgot to even put their logo on the cover page, which is so amateur. Out of the 22 pages of core content, at least 8 of them were blank pages. One thing that is very noticeable is that on this report, throughout the entire report, there's no Archewell logo. The first page, a letter from our co-executive directors, really sets the tone of what is going on with Archewell. If there's one video that I would ask you to like and share, it would be this one. So please just take a second for me and hit that like button. All right, so this bullshit report begins with a letter from our co-executive directors. In quotes, it says, "At the Archewell Foundation, our core purpose is quite simply to do good. We meet the moment by showing up, taking action, and using our unparalleled spotlight to uplift and unite communities, both local and global, online and offline." Whatever the hell that means. We believe that philanthropic work is more than a handout. It's a handheld. To activate this belief, we independently create dynamic and impactful programming to serve communities in need. We also partner with key organizations and leaders to identify immediate needs, build meaningful initiatives, and drive long-term change. Since its founding in 2020 by Prince Harry and Meghan, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, the Archewell Foundation has built a growing body of work rooted in the philosophy of compassion, connection, and care. With the leadership of the Duke and Duchess, we have cultivated strong strategic partnerships with leading organizations, invested millions of dollars across the nonprofit space for sustainable programs and campaigns, and designed a strategy centered on large and lasting community impact. The results of their work are undeniable, both through metrics that can be seen and an emotional impact that can be felt. Baked into all that we do is the core belief that our collective well-being and mental health are paramount. Our initiatives between 2020 and 2022 have included investments in vaccine equity, global relief centers, refugee resettlement, the care of families and communities in need, and the reshaping of our online world with the support of groundbreaking leaders in this space. Thank you for helping us create lasting impact and drive systemic change one act of service at a time. If you think and believe that the Duke and Duchess signed off on this because they are the co-executive directors, which would make sense, you're wrong. It looks like they dropped Archewell into the lap of James Holt and Shauna Knepp. Now, James Holt has been there from the beginning and probably was sold a bunch of bullshit in order to take over this. And let's not forget that Shauna Knepp literally just joined Archewell. I don't think these two fully understand what this couple has done and how deep in shite this foundation slash public charity if the IRS decides to conduct an audit. Let me remind everyone, and for those that don't know, please pay attention to this. Meghan and Harry, or James Holt and Shauna Knepp, are pushing this as if it's a private foundation, when in actuality it's not. There's a big difference between a private foundation and being deemed a public charity. Obviously, one of the big differences is the tax breaks, but what comes with that when you're labeled a public charity is having to be transparent with the public. You cannot operate as a foundation and hide certain things from the public when you are getting the benefits of being a public charity. So, for those that are not familiar with the IRS and our tax law and what can be considered charity and not, let me just go over the exemption requirements for 501c3 public charity organizations on what they can and cannot do. According to the IRS, meaning our government body, it says to be tax exempt under Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code, an organization must be organized and operated exclusively for exempt purposes set forth in Section 501c3, and none of its earnings may inure to any private shareholder or individual. In addition, it may not be an action organization. Example, it may not attempt to influence legislation as a substantial part of its activities, and it may not participate in any campaign activity for or against political candidates. The organization must not be organized or operated for the benefit of private interests, and no part of Section 501c3 organization's net earnings may inure to the benefit of any private shareholder or individual. If the organization engages in an excess benefit transaction with a person having substantial influence over the organization, an excise tax may be imposed on the person and any organization managers agreeing to this transaction. Okay, let's talk through this. Archewell Public Charity is an organization which is allegedly receiving a substantial part of its support from a governmental unit or the general public. Archewell shouldn't have even been approved for public charity status in the first place, but that's a whole different story for a different day. The key thing to understand here is that being classified in this status means that they are obligated by law to provide the public financial details of how they're spending the public's money. Many legitimate public charities put their financials in their annual report, something that Archewell didn't do, which they're not obligated to do. However, if anybody from the public reaches out to Archewell and asks them for this information and they deny it, then the IRS needs to know about it because that is breaking the rules for being classified in this tax break status. Now, with that in mind, remember, I just read off the exemption requirements that the organization must not be organized or operated for the benefit of private interests. And no part of the Section 501c3 organization's net earnings must inure to the benefit of any private shareholder or individual. You got that? Okay. Now remember, I opened up this video by reading the executive directors of Archewell and their statement. If you notice, Meghan and Harry didn't sign it. I did a video way back in the day when I was just starting out about this, so I'm going to insert a little segment of it. For some, it might be familiar and just a refresher, and for others that are new, it may fill in some gaps and catch everybody up to speed.
They set up their Archewell entity, which at the time, no one knew where to look to notice how the division was set up. Months passed by and news got out that the company was filed in Delaware. For many, it was surprising to see that there were two Archewell entities registered. Many found this second entry odd since it was filed by the same person on April 17, 2020. On this same day, Meghan's PR engine cranks out this story. This article talks about the risk this couple is taking as they embark into philanthrocapitalism. Being of high net worth could make them targets as they go about preaching their bullshit without the coverage of the royal security. Notice the date. April 17th. The same day they filed the second Archewell entity. This date is a very important detail. And this is why. The first entity that was set up was for profit. It is now known as Archewell Productions.
I'd like to interject and say that Archewell Audio, LLC, was then formed in 2021. Now, we know that they have other corporations, I call them shell companies, that they have opened, and we will get to that in a second. Just stay with me for a moment.
The setup for the foundation was an afterthought. I believe they were using this angle of doing charity work to get more money from Charles. The foundation was not a primary focus, otherwise they would have filed it first. First of all, how did this entity get approved as a 501c3 non-for-profit without having the 3-year history? This is a mandatory requirement. Secondly, they are classified as a public charity, not a private foundation. There is a big difference, and many people try to go this route because they don't have to pay the IRC Chapter 42 taxes. This classification is the most advantageous to have, as well as it is very difficult to get. There are metrics that have to be met and provided in order to qualify. These two frauds had to show certain percentages of public support and total support. Remember, they filed this in April and had not been in operation. So what numbers could they possibly have given? Was it from the massive fundraising push by their hate group? This is a big problem. Here is why. This non-for-profit had to file taxes for 2020. If the Sussex squad raised over $50,000 for these charities, how the f can this entity claim they did not receive receipts greater than $50,000?
The one that I want you to keep at the forefront is Frimfram and Cobblestone Lane. Both of these LLCs, well, Frimfram Megan had before she met Harry, but then switched it over to Delaware, and Cobblestone Lane was formulated in 2020 of February, before anything was set up, such as Archewell Foundation, Inc., whatever. So now we're going to take a look at the IRS's position on conflict of interest policy around charitable organizations. So it says, charitable organizations are frequently subject to intense public scrutiny, especially where they appear to have inappropriately benefited their officers, directors, or trustees. The IRS also has an oversight role with respect to charitable organizations. An important part of this oversight is providing organizations with strategies that will help avoid the appearance or actuality of private benefit to individuals who are in a position of substantial authority. Now, this is important. A conflict of interest occurs where individuals' obligation to further the organization's charitable purposes is at odds with their own financial interests. For example, a conflict of interest would occur where an officer, director, or trustee votes on a contract between the organization and a business that is owned by the officer, director, or trustee. Conflicts of interest frequently arise when setting compensation or benefits for officers, directors, or trustees. A conflict of interest policy is intended to help ensure that when actual or potential conflicts of interest arise, the organization has a process in place under which the affected individual will advise the governing body about all the relevant facts concerning the situation. A conflict of interest policy is also intended to establish procedures under which individuals who have a conflict of interest will be excused from voting on such matters. Does Archewell have a conflict of interest policy put in place? No, they don't. So apart from any appearance or impropriety, organizations will lose their tax-exempt status unless they operate in a manner consistent with their charitable purposes. Serving private interests more than insubstantially is inconsistent with accomplishing charitable purposes. For example, paying an individual who is in a position of substantial authority excessive compensation serves a private interest. So now here's the question. Meghan and Harry's names are nowhere to be found legally attached to the registration for Archewell Foundation. So the final piece to this in the conflict of interest, it says, providing facilities, goods, or services to an individual who is in a position of substantial authority also serves a private interest unless the benefits are part of a reasonable compensation arrangement or they are available to the public on equal terms and conditions. So what this to me sounds like is that Meghan and Harry cannot be taking private jets and paying themselves a salary and using people's money to go fund their lifestyle. So now the question is, did they remove themselves as directors from the initial registration form when they filed with California? Because all the records now don't show Meghan and Harry's name, but instead they show Richard Jenow, Andrew Meyer, and then also on the taxes for 2020 is James Holt. Do they realize that they can't grift like how they thought they would grift because of this conflict of interest? Here's what I think is now going on. I think Meghan and Harry are doing what Harry did with the Invictus Games, as he was a founding member and has, kicked off the inception of the Invictus Games. He's now become sort of like the mascot, but not really involved with the foundation from a business perspective. I think that Archewell is being dumped in the lap of James Holt and this new person to alleviate any sort of suspicion or inquiry into the nefarious activity of Meghan and Harry. Now, this is pure speculation until we see the actual financials from the IRS. We can only guess where the $13 million came from. Now, think about it. Is it possible that Meghan and Harry took their names off of the legal paperwork for being directors or trustees for Archewell? Possibly. Could they now become public members and give donations to Archewell? Absolutely. So do we think that maybe one of these LLCs, like a Cobblestone Lane or a Frim Fram or some other one of their 11 shell corporations, took money from, let's say, their earnings that they made from Netflix or Spotify and the book deal and turned it into a DAF so it wouldn't be taxable, and then anonymously give it in a fund and give it over to Archewell? Absolutely. Let's remember that the Olive Garden Castle in Montecito is actually under a trust. So could they have incorporated that as part of their assets and how they came up with a $9 million number? Absolutely. But in order for us to confirm all this, we need to see the financials from the 990. And that is something that, because they are listed as a public charity and not a private foundation, by law, they have to show the public if it is requested. So, friends, email info@archewell.com and ask them for the tax return for 2021. Tell them you have the right to see it. Otherwise, you will be writing to the IRS, period. If they don't send it within 30 days, then the IRS has every right to go in and audit them. What I suspect is a misappropriation of funds. These statistics mean nothing when there's no dollar figure or value for what people have been donating versus what is actually really contributing to these numbers. Let's remember, Meghan and Harry do not do anything unless there is a return on investment. So as they talk and boast about this 12.66 million vaccines getting out with Global Citizen and making it sound like they were the ones responsible for it, when in actuality it was a collective effort, it's called impact investing, philanthrocapitalism, guys. They don't do anything unless there's a return on investment. And with this situation, being that they had partnered with Ethic and whatever that investment firm's about, realize that these types of social causes, such as vaccine production, there's no doubt that they have their hands in this from a monetary perspective, in seeing that those vaccines go out there, whether it be through the pharmaceuticals and getting those vaccines out, but they are getting money on the back end for it in their portfolio. So all of this show that we're seeing is really just a facade for them to make money. They profited from World Central Kitchen. What do you think they did? They didn't really actually give a roof away, or they didn't actually build a place, and I think whether it be the Dominican Republic or some place where the storm had affected them. No, they act like a bank where they give out money to this organization and its finance with a lower interest than if they went to a regular bank. They're not doing this out of the kindness of their heart. They're doing this to make money. And I read somewhere allegedly that even through the website of Archewell, that anybody that goes through Archewell and donates to this World Central Kitchen, then Megan gets a kickback on the back end. And just like that, this is how money gets sort of hidden in transfer or transaction. Because World Central Kitchen could say that this is a processing fee to use this route or mechanism to source donations. And all of a sudden now you lose the paper trail. And then Megator has the funds routed to a for-profit organization, LLC, that she has set up, or shell corporation, such as Senior Care, Loving Kindness, whatever that is that Doria has set up, or Frim Fram, or Cobblestone Lane. The one initiative that I see that Meghan and Harry are really invested in is taking control of people's freedom of thought and freedom of speech through controlling your online behavior and activity, specifically focused on indoctrinating and brainwashing the youth. They are preaching that they're fighting misinformation, disinformation, when we know that these two proven liars have been pushing out the same misinformation and disinformation, not only to cause harm to other people, but also to control and push an agenda that is very dangerous, with the very specific goal to gain power and to make a profit by exploiting serious social issues and actually making it worse. Ask yourself this: did Meghan and Harry take the vaccine? I will guarantee you that at least one of them didn't, because allegedly she was heavily pregnant. Honestly, I don't think Archewell is going to make it another year. Just by looking at the very last page of this BS report, look at the looking ahead. It reads, as we approach our third year at Archewell Foundation, we reflect on the depth of the experience. What? It has been rich with learning, growth, inspiration, and action. We've made new partnerships and strengthened existing ones. We've rolled up our sleeves, opened our arms, and opened our hearts, creating connections through care and compassion in times of need and times of crisis. And we've seen the transformative power of leading through this lens. That sounds so much like Meghan writing that. We're excited to embark on this next chapter with a renewed spirit and an unwavering commitment to key issues which have an overwhelming ripple effect on our collective well-being. Yeah, no doubt Meghan wrote this. Dovetailing off of the impact we've made during this startup phase, we will continue to build a better world online, work to restore trust in information, and above all, uplift communities online and offline, local and global. That was all Meghan. And what this looks like, it was like, here you go, James. Go run with it. We're out. And they've wiped their hands literally of this. Again, who have we seen last year doing all the bitch work of things that Meghan and Harry didn't want to do because they were less glamorous? It was James. Remember, he flew to New York for that award given out by that Afghanistan organization, you know, the pay for play. He also went to Uvalde to cut the ribbon for the playground. He was also seen making Thanksgiving meals. Where were Meghan and Harry? Nowhere to be found. Let's not forget MLK, Meghan and Harry, nowhere to be seen, but I guarantee James was there. The report made no mention of all the people that came in the door and out the door. Those are the people that they should have really thanked, because God only knows that those are the ones that had suffered. It says, thank you to our staff and our partners who made this work possible, the Archewell Foundation team. If you notice, only James Holt is the only recognizable name. What happened to Miranda Barbeau? Wasn't she the PR guru taken from Obama who helped him win his election? And I want to raise the point here that, again, Meghan and Harry choose to give executives to Caucasians, but then giving lower end jobs to the minorities. Disha Tank is an Asian, Indian, and then you have the program coordinator who is Black. So who is the actual racist here? And trying not to bridge the pay gap. Remember, Megan did this with archetypes. All the executive producers and executive directors were all Caucasians. Then those with the lower end jobs, they were all minorities. And on top of it, took minorities to exploit in the podcast. So you tell me, who is really trying to bridge the gender gap? Who is really trying to foster pay equity? If they don't even do this in their own house, how can you take them serious for really saying that they're going to do it? And this is the hypocrisy that we keep talking about. They do the exact opposite because they know what they're doing is exploiting others for profit. And I say it again, it looks to me like they dumped this in James Holt's lap. I don't see Meghan and Harry continuing further in 2023, focusing on the actual charity work. Yeah, they might put their names in there because what Meghan wants to be is an influencer. And the reason why they're holding on to these titles is because adding the titles there gives them the access and opens doors for them to take advantage of others. And that's exactly what they've been doing for the last 3 years. With these organizations, it's a one hand washes the other situation. You do for me and I'll do for you, meaning, again, this is Meghan and Harry banking on their name and their influence over giving actual help or support financially to a lot of these organizations. Just the fact that they would get a shout out would help some of these non-for-profits who are legitimately trying to do good work. Now, here's what I think. Being that this registration in California has expired and they have been delinquent in renewing their registry in the state of California, we're going to see a different filing shortly. Actually, it's in process. I will bet that Meghan and Harry's names will get pulled off of the actual document, and James Holt's name will be replacing it. Now, I think a lot of this has to do with alleviating Meghan and Harry of any liability, but also if the two are separated, and Meghan now is trying to clear a path for her to go into politics, this would actually make sense for them to do because you cannot have a foundation, as we know with Ms. Hillary, can't really use foundation money to push a campaign. And part of having a charity, one of the rules is you cannot push or lobby for certain platforms or political candidates. So this would be a direct conflict of interests if she were to go down that path. And for any pro-con artist, they would know to wipe their hands clean if there was any nefarious business going on, trying to somehow maneuver money around here and there to avoid paying their fair share of taxes. The fact that Archewell was not transparent by sharing their financial report shows that there is something that could be possibly hiding. And being that Meghan wiped her hands, I'm sure she's left James Holt with a lot of shite to clean up. This is all just my observation and speculation. Again, we don't know the full details until we see those financials. And when they come out, we will be revisiting this again. But what do you guys think? Are you convinced with this report? Do you believe what they're saying in it? What are your thoughts? Leave your comments below. As always, I will be back with more content, but until then, be safe, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.
It was such a fraud.